The autumn wind swept through the small town of Millbrook, Vermont, carrying with it the scent of burning wood and the whispers of judgment. Everyone in town knew about Thomas Brennan and his peculiar chimney. They called it ridiculous, wasteful, an eyesore that ruined the clean lines of his modest two-story home on Maple Street. Thomas was a man of 43 years, a quiet stonemason by trade who had learned his craft from his Irish grandfather. He had calloused hands, a weathered face that told stories of long days under the sun, and eyes that held a stubborn determination most people mistook for foolishness. When he built his chimney that summer of 1987, the entire neighborhood gathered to watch and mock. The structure was nearly twice the width of any standard chimney in Millbrook. While most families installed chimneys barely 14 inches across, Thomas constructed his at a startling 28 inches wide. Margaret Foster, the town's self-appointed arbiter of taste, stood on her porch with arms crossed, shaking her head in theatrical disapproval. She was a woman who wore her superiority like expensive perfume, suffocating everyone around her with it. "That's absolutely grotesque," she announced loudly enough for half the street to hear. "It looks like a factory smokestack on a family home. What is he thinking?" Her husband Richard, a successful insurance broker who drove a new Cadillac every 2 years, chuckled beside her. "The man clearly has no sense of proportion or aesthetics. Probably thinks bigger is always better, like some sort of caveman." Their teenage son Brad joined in, mimicking Thomas's careful, methodical movements as he laid each brick. "Look at me. I'm building a chimney for giants." The boys' friends erupted in laughter. Thomas heard every word. He always did. But he continued working, his trowel spreading mortar with the precision of someone who understood that some knowledge came from generations of experience, not from the approval of neighbors who had never built anything with their own hands. His wife Sarah brought him lemonade that afternoon, her face tight with embarrassment. She was a gentle woman who worked as a seamstress, someone who valued peace above all else. "Tom, maybe they have a point," she said quietly, glancing nervously at the gathering crowd. "It does look rather large. Could we not make it a bit narrower, just to fit in better?" Thomas took the glass from her hands, his fingers dusty with brick powder. "Sarah, my grandfather taught me something important. He said a chimney isn't about looking pretty. It's about drawing smoke properly, about airflow and draft. This width allows the heat to rise without restriction, prevents creosote buildup, and will burn cleaner than any narrow chimney in this town." "But everyone thinks." "I don't build for everyone," he interrupted gently. "I build for us, for our safety, for what works." Sarah said nothing more, but her silence carried disappointment. By October, every house on Maple Street had their fireplaces roaring. The temperatures dropped fast that year, an early winter that caught New England by surprise. The Foster family, the Hendersons next door, the Patels across the street, the young Morrison couple 2 houses down. Everyone burned wood to supplement their heating bills. And everyone except Thomas started having problems. The complaints began subtly. Richard Foster mentioned at the town meeting that his fireplace seemed to smoke more than usual. Within 2 weeks, Margaret was coughing constantly, blaming it on the season. Their son Brad developed a persistent wheeze. The Hendersons called a chimney sweep after smoke backed up into their living room during dinner, sending the family scrambling outside. The sweep emerged from their roof shaking his head, his face black with soot. "You've got dangerous creosote buildup in here," he told them. "This narrow flue doesn't allow proper ventilation. The smoke moves too slowly, deposits accumulate, and you're looking at a potential chimney fire." The same story repeated itself across Maple Street. The Patels had to extinguish their fire entirely after smoke detectors shrieked at 2 in the morning. The Morrisons watched in horror as black soot stains appeared on their newly painted ceiling. Meanwhile, Thomas's wide chimney drew perfectly. Smoke rose in a clean, steady column, disappearing into the Vermont sky without hesitation. His fireplace burned hot and efficient, the house warm and comfortable, the air inside crystal clear. He sat in his armchair each evening, watching the flames dance, saying nothing to anyone about how well his chimney performed. He didn't need to gloat. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. November brought the first real snowstorm, and with it came a crisis that would expose every flaw in Millbrook's narrow chimneys. The Henderson family woke to their smoke detectors screaming at 4 in the morning. John Henderson rushed downstairs to find thick gray smoke pouring from their fireplace, filling the living room like fog. His wife Linda grabbed their 2 children and ran outside in their pajamas, feet bare on the frozen ground. The fire department arrived within minutes, but the damage was done. The chimney sweep had been right about the creosote buildup. It had ignited inside the narrow flue, creating an internal chimney fire that cracked the masonry and sent flames licking up into the attic insulation. The Hendersons stood on Thomas's lawn that morning, wrapped in blankets provided by the firefighters, watching their home smolder. Thomas had offered them his porch, hot coffee, his phone to call relatives. Margaret Foster witnessed the scene from her window and felt genuine fear for the first time. She looked at her own fireplace, at the black residue that had been accumulating around the opening, at the way smoke sometimes drifted back into the room before finding its way up the flue. By afternoon, the entire neighborhood had gathered at the town hall for an emergency meeting. The fire chief stood at the front, his expression grim. "We need to talk about chimney safety," he began. "The Henderson fire was preventable. Those old narrow chimneys most of you have, they're not adequate for the amount of wood you're burning. The creosote builds up too fast, the draft is insufficient, and you're all sitting on potential disasters." "But we've always had these chimneys," Richard Foster protested, his voice defensive. "My father had the same size, my grandfather too. They're standard." "Standard from 50 years ago," the chief corrected. "Before people burned wood as their primary heat source. Before energy costs made everyone rely on their fireplaces day and night. The building codes have changed for a reason." Margaret stood up, her face flushed with anger that masked her embarrassment. "So what are we supposed to do? Rebuild our entire chimneys? Do you have any idea what that costs?" The fire chief nodded slowly. "I understand it's expensive, but it's either that or stop using your fireplaces entirely until spring. The risk is too high." The room erupted in protests. Winter had barely started. Oil prices were astronomical. Electric heating would bankrupt most families on Maple Street. Thomas sat in the back row silent. Sarah squeezed his hand, and for the first time in months, there was something different in her touch. Not quite pride, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Then Brad Foster's voice cut through the noise, sharp with the cruelty only teenagers can perfect. "Hey, why doesn't everyone just copy the freak with the giant chimney? Maybe we should all make our houses look like industrial warehouses." The laughter that followed Brad's comment died quickly when Thomas stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but something in his posture commanded attention. The room fell silent. "I didn't build my chimney to win any beauty contests," Thomas said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I built it because my grandfather taught me how chimneys actually work. He was a mason in County Cork before he came to America, built chimneys for castles and manor houses that are still standing today." Margaret Foster opened her mouth to speak, but Thomas continued. "A wide flue allows smoke to rise naturally. The heat doesn't get trapped, the airflow is constant, and creosote has nowhere to cling because the draft pulls everything up and out. It's not complicated. It's just knowledge that people forgot because they cared more about saving a few bricks than about doing things right." Richard Foster stood up, his face red. "So you're saying we're all idiots for having normal chimneys?" "I'm saying you prioritized appearance over function," Thomas replied calmly. "And now you're paying the price." The fire chief cleared his throat. "Mr. Brennan, would you be willing to let our building inspector examine your chimney? If it's as effective as you claim, maybe we can use it as a model." Thomas nodded. "Any time you'd like." Over the next week, the building inspector, 2 chimney sweeps, and a structural engineer visited Thomas's home. They measured, photographed, tested the draft, examined the interior with cameras. Sarah served them coffee and homemade apple pie, her previous embarrassment transforming into quiet satisfaction. The inspector's report was delivered at the following town meeting. His conclusions were undeniable. Thomas Brennan's chimney operated at optimal efficiency, showed zero creosote buildup despite constant use, and posed no fire risk whatsoever. If you're rooting for Thomas and want to see how this changes everything, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. The transformation of Maple Street is just beginning. Margaret Foster sat in stunned silence. Around her, neighbors who had mocked Thomas for months now looked at him with new eyes. The Henderson family, still living in a hotel while their house was repaired, approached Thomas after the meeting. "Would you consider helping us rebuild our chimney?" John Henderson asked, his voice humble. "We can pay whatever your rate is." Before Thomas could answer, 3 other families stepped forward with the same request. Then 5 more. Then the Patels, the Morrisons, even the young couple from the end of the street who had joined in the mockery. Only the Fosters remained in their seats. Richard's jaw clenched tight, Margaret's eyes fixed on the floor. Their son Brad had disappeared the moment the inspector's report was read, unable to face the man he had called a freak. Thomas looked at the crowd gathering around him and felt something shift in his chest. Not vindication exactly, something deeper. The quiet satisfaction of being proven right by truth itself. Thomas became the busiest mason in Millbrook almost overnight. His small workshop behind the house transformed into a planning center where neighbors lined up with blueprints, questions, and apologies they struggled to articulate. He worked 14-hour days that December, Sarah by his side handling appointments and calculations. The woman who had once begged him to conform now defended his methods fiercely to anyone who listened. She had discovered something about her husband during those difficult months, a strength that came from conviction rather than stubbornness. The Henderson chimney was completed first, wider and more efficient than their original. John Henderson shook Thomas's hand with tears in his eyes the day it was finished. "You saved my family," he said simply, "not just from another fire. You gave us back our home." Word spread beyond Maple Street. The local newspaper ran a feature story titled "The Mason Who Knew Better." Hardware stores in 3 counties started stocking wider flue liners. Building inspectors revised their recommendations. Thomas received calls from Burlington, from Montpelier, from towns across Vermont where families had experienced the same problems. He hired 2 apprentices, young men eager to learn the old techniques his grandfather had taught him. He showed them how to lay brick with precision, how to calculate draft angles, how to build something that would outlast trends and opinions. By January, 11 houses on Maple Street had new chimneys. The neighborhood skyline had changed, dotted with structures that all resembled Thomas's original design. What had once been an eyesore was now the standard, the mark of a home where safety mattered more than conformity. The Patels invited Thomas and Sarah to dinner, a feast of Indian dishes served with genuine gratitude. The Morrisons named their newborn son Thomas, a gesture that made the mason clear his throat and look away. The town council commissioned him to inspect and recommend improvements for the old courthouse chimney, a structure built in 1823 that had been smoking for decades. But the Fosters remained holdouts. Their chimney continued to smoke, Margaret's cough worsened, and Richard's pride prevented him from admitting he needed help. They burned less wood, relied more on expensive oil heat, and pretended not to notice when neighbors gathered on Thomas's porch for evening conversations, drawn to the man they had once ridiculed. One February morning, Thomas found Margaret Foster standing in his driveway. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by months of being wrong. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Whether from smoke or tears, he couldn't tell. "My son has asthma now," she said without preamble. "The doctor says it's from prolonged smoke exposure. Richard won't admit we need help, but I'm asking you anyway. Not for us. For Brad." Thomas studied her face, seeing past the pride to the fear underneath. A mother's fear, the kind that transcended social standing and neighborhood politics. "I can start next week," he told her. The Foster chimney took 3 weeks to rebuild. Thomas worked alone on this one, refusing payment despite Margaret's insistence. Some things, he told her, weren't about money. Richard Foster watched from inside the house, never coming out to speak, his silence a fortress he had built around his wounded pride. But Thomas noticed him standing at the window each morning, observing the meticulous work, seeing firsthand the care that went into every brick. On the final day, as Thomas cleaned his tools and prepared to leave, Richard finally emerged. He stood on the porch, hands shoved deep in his pockets, struggling with words that clearly tasted bitter. "I was wrong about you," he said finally. "About the chimney. About everything." Thomas nodded, offering nothing to make the moment easier. Some apologies needed to be difficult to mean anything. "I taught my son to mock you," Richard continued, his voice breaking slightly. "And now he's sick because I was too proud to admit I didn't know better than you did. What kind of father does that make me?" "The kind who can still learn," Thomas replied quietly. "The kind who eventually puts his family first." That evening, Thomas lit a fire in the Fosters' new fireplace while the family watched. The smoke rose in a perfect column, clean and strong, disappearing into the winter sky without hesitation. The room filled with warmth but no haze, no burning eyes, no coughing fits. Margaret sat on the couch with Brad beside her, the boy's breathing already easier, his inhaler unused for the first time in weeks. She looked at Thomas with something beyond gratitude, a recognition of the grace he had shown when he could have chosen revenge. Within a month, Brad Foster appeared at Thomas's workshop after school. He stood in the doorway, shuffling his feet, looking everywhere except at the mason. "I was wondering," he started, then stopped. His voice was different now, stripped of the casual cruelty that had once defined it. "I was wondering if maybe you needed another apprentice. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to learn. I want to learn how to build things the right way." Thomas studied the boy for a long moment. He saw genuine remorse there, the kind that comes from watching your own mistakes hurt the people you love. "Be here Saturday morning at 7, Thomas said. "Wear clothes you don't mind ruining." The transformation of Maple Street was complete. Every chimney now drew clean, every fireplace burned safe and warm. But more than the physical structures had changed. The neighborhood had learned something about humility, about the difference between appearance and substance, about respecting knowledge even when it comes in unexpected forms. Thomas sat with Sarah that night, watching flames dance in their fireplace, the original wide chimney that had started everything. "Your grandfather would be proud," Sarah said softly. Thomas smiled. He already knew. 5 years later, Thomas Brennan stood at the dedication ceremony for the new Millbrook Community Center, watching as the mayor unveiled a plaque beside the massive stone fireplace that dominated the main hall. The chimney was a masterpiece, 24 feet tall and 30 inches wide, built by Thomas and his 3 apprentices over the course of that summer. Brad Foster had laid many of those bricks himself. Now a confident young man of 22 who understood that true craftsmanship came from patience and respect for proven methods. In recognition of Thomas Brennan, the plaque read, "Whose commitment to quality over convention made our community safer and taught us the value of knowledge preserved across generations." Margaret Foster stood beside Sarah in the crowd, the 2 women now close friends who met for coffee every Thursday morning. Margaret's cough had disappeared entirely, and she had become the loudest advocate for proper chimney construction in 3 counties, serving on the Building Code Revision Committee with the passion of the converted. Richard Foster had sold his insurance business and partnered with Thomas to form Brennan and Foster Masonry, a company that now employed 12 people and had contracts throughout New England. The former rivals had discovered they balanced each other well, Richard's business acumen complementing Thomas's craftsmanship. The Hendersons, the Patels, the Morrisons, and dozens of other families filled the hall, their presence a testament to the ripple effect of one man's refusal to compromise on what he knew to be right. The fire chief, now retired, sat in the front row, grinning at the vindication of his original warnings. As the ceremony concluded and people gathered around the fireplace to admire the stonework, Brad approached Thomas with a young woman beside him. "Mr. Brennan, this is Elena, my fiancée. I was telling her how I want our house to have a chimney like yours, wide enough to last generations." Thomas shook the young woman's hand, seeing in Brad's eyes the man he had become, someone who now built up instead of tearing down. That evening, Thomas and Sarah sat on their porch, watching smoke rise from chimneys all along Maple Street, each one a monument to the principle that substance matters more than appearance, that tradition grounded in wisdom deserves respect, and that sometimes the courage to stand alone eventually brings everyone together. Thank you for watching this story until the very end. If it touched your heart or taught you something valuable, please hit that like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next story, and let us know in the comments what kind of tale you'd like to hear next. Sometimes the people who are ridiculed for being different are simply ahead of their time, seeing truths others have forgotten. Until next time, remember that real strength isn't about fitting in, it's about standing firm in what you know to be true.